Silence is safer. Speaking up comes at a cost. This is the Audacity Tapes, where women have chosen courage across cultures, continents, and systems of power. I'm Robin Jorgensen. Welcome to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Audacity Tapes. My guests today represent two generations of Afghan women united by a shared belief that human dignity is not negotiable. Joining me first is Makhfi Azizi, an Afghan journalist, advocate, and voice for Afghan women and girls whose work focuses on amplifying the stories of those living under Taliban rule and mobilizing international action in the face of gender apartheid. She is joined by Dr. Sima Samar, a physician, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, trailblazing human rights advocate, former Vice President of Afghanistan, former Minister of Women's Affairs, and a founder and longtime chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Council. Together, they represent both the history and the future of a movement that refuses to surrender. Makhfi, Dr. Samar, welcome to the Audacity Tapes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, Robin.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Dr. Samar, when people hear the word Afghanistan, they mostly think of war, the Taliban, or geopolitics. But before all of that happened, that was home. What Afghanistan do you remember before 1978?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I born in Afghanistan, I grown up in Afghanistan, and I studied in Afghanistan. It's interesting because I went to co-education school in Helmand, which is the most conservative part of the country right now, 60 years ago. And I complete my my school up to 12th grade, and also, of course, university was co-education. The country was poor, but it was really peaceful. I mean, we were going towards the development as we could. For example, establishing more schools, establishing more clinics and hospitals, more promoting more education for women. And it was actually, at least I don't remember that burqa was compulsory. And It was, when I was young, the prime minister on that time, Dawood Khan, he actually removed the burqa from women to be compulsory. So women had to choose what they want to wear and what they want to do. So this was not the case 60 years ago, as I keep saying it, or more than 60 actually. But now we are stuck in this problem that we see. And I would say that the whole problem started with the invasion, the coup d'etat, and then the invasion of the USSR in the country. Yeah. So unfortunately, our geopolitical location of the country is actually make us vulnerable to the interference of different powers. And we end up with so ultra-extremist people that do not allow women to get education and do not allow women to walk in the street. Yesterday, they arrested a lot of women in Herat, and the day before yesterday. Today, they really arrested a lot of women because they protested against this arrest. And just they arrest them. And all the videos and the information shows that they were fully covered.
Wow. Makhfi, when you hear Dr. Samar describe the Afghanistan that she remembers, what feels familiar to you and what feels like a completely different country?
Well, first, thank you so much for having this conversation with us, Robin. This is so timely given the last few days in Afghanistan and what Dr. Samar just described on what's happening to women in Herat in the western part of the country as of, Saturday this week. What she said, I mean, parts of it are familiar because I also grew up during the 20 years of the U.S. NATO involvement in Afghanistan. And I often tell people that I was a little older, but the generation below me, I mean, people who are in their 20s and their teens, they really don't know Afghanistan before 2001. And certainly the 60s and 70s, and the way Dr. Samar described the freedom that women had and the opportunities that women had back then. I often tell people that if you're a teenager and if you're in your 20s, just imagine your dreams and ambitions and the freedoms you have. And that is very simple things as dreaming of going to school every day, finishing your high school, planning to go to college, planning a career, planning, hoping to help yourself, your family, and your community. And that's how during the 20 years of the US and NATO involvement in other countries, women were, living under and were hoping and dreaming for. And that's what I know, and that's the generation below me, I mean, after me, can only, understand. Now it's completely different. I mean, again, girls above 10, 12 in some parts of the country, as young as 10 or even 9, are not allowed to go to school. And when we say school, that's not a simple thing. That's not, it's just school. I mean, education really, really defines your future. It gives you identity, it gives you freedoms, it gives you independence. It gives you humanity. You can stand up for yourself, you can speak, you can earn, you help, you become, a productive member of society.
Right.
And I just don't, it's confusing that people don't understand the gravity of what's happening these days to women and girls and all the people in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into that in a little bit. What is something outsiders have always misunderstood about Afghanistan? Dr. Samar?
I think one of the problems that they are a couple of people or some people from different other countries who claim that they know Afghanistan and they write the book about Afghanistan. And they show Afghanistan that they are really backwarded people. And of course, they use the excuse of our religion and our culture in order to introduce Afghanistan. And they keep saying these are the people who never had a government or nobody can govern them. Which is not true. I grown up in that country. We had a government and we had a law. We had enforcement of the laws before the coup d'etat and before the USSR invasion, even though during those people, there were some kind of a government or governance in the country. Information about Afghanistan show us that, I mean, even the media now show the men aggressive with long beard and dirty clothes and with the gun and unwashed faces and so aggressive, and they try to beat everyone. And the women behind that blue burqas and blue tent, they don't see the human face of Afghanistan within those pictures. And that is very, very unfortunate. And then they blame always the Afghan people, not the actual geopolitical and Cold War policies, which turned us to have Taliban as a government. We had Taliban in 1990s, which was same people, I mean, and then it was some people, I would name the people who start talking with them, and they were saying that they are changed. They said that they are learned from their mistakes in the past during their first government, and they are going to respect the people's human rights and so on, and women's rights. But we saw how aggressive they were, because during the 20 years that Makhfi just mentioned, during the presence of NATO forces in Afghanistan, they continued the brutality. They continued to burn the schools, girls' schools and boys' schools. They continued to kill the teachers. They continued to cut the hand of the people who participated on the election, cut the finger of the people who had already voted and they were ink that blue or purple ink on their finger. They did everything. They committed suicide attack. They burned the schools. They committed suicide attacks in the schools, in the funerals, in the mosques, in the wedding parties, you name it, in the hospital and so on. So we knew that they are the same people.
Right.
They cannot be changed. In fact, when they took the power this time, they are more sophisticated because now they use the technology. Of course, technology is used by everyone. But during the first Taliban regime, we didn't have telephone in the country.
Right.
But now they are using the technology and they are more sophisticated so the way they are promoting their laws and the way they are promoting their morality police and give them unlimited power. So they are in the street, some of them with the white gown, which is insult to doctors. As a medical doctor, I feel that it's insult to us. And they just go in and take a decision about anybody's not only the women, but mainly women. They make a decision about the boys also. You don't have a proper hat, you don't have a long beard, you don't wear a proper clothes. These are crazy things.
Yeah.
Imagine that they have a list of orders for the universities, that the Sunni, the one who are not Sunnis, we have Shias, Ismailis, and some other non-Muslims in Afghanistan, they have to convert to be Muslim. And they should not wear the Western clothes, they should wear the Afghan clothes, they should wear a hat, they should wear a turban. Stupid things. And this is, as I said, it's become more sophisticated. They now turn it to a law and then the enforcement of the law.
Right.
No
Yeah.
proper access to the judiciary or fair trial. It's the person, the enforcers or the morality police can decide about somebody in the street. The recent law, just a few weeks ago, it is the criminal procedure, which is passed by the Taliban leadership. And in that criminal procedure, they actually legalize the slavery in the country. So a woman who do not comply as a good woman, as a good wife, as an obedient wife, and go to their father family from abusive husband or in-laws, she can be punished by the husband or the owner. And if during the punishment, beating her up, if her bone is break, and then she has to prove in front of the judge, the husband will be only arrested or punished for 15 days. But if they actually use the animals, dogs or birds, they'll be in jail for 3 to 6 months. So imagine 15 days in prison for breaking wife's hand or head or legs, or make an open wound on her body. And then she has to prove it.
Wow.
For a woman to prove it in front of a judge, first of all, how can she reach to the judge?
Right.
Secondly, she has to bring 2 adult male as a witness that it was done by the husband.
Who are even willing to go with her to do that.
Of course, nobody goes with her because she
Right.
has to be accompanied by mahram. And then the husband is the closest mahram for her.
So, Dr. Samar, the title of your memoir is Outspoken. Looking back across your life, what did being outspoken cost you?
When I was still the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, when I was talking with our president fighting for some issues on human rights, I was saying I really lost my freedom, basic freedom, with this job, just to protect the other people's freedom. So I was not able to walk on the street. I was not able to go without bodyguards. Not as a normal person to go in a party or any celebration. I had to be accompanied by guards and so on. I think it is, but I do not regret, because I was able to establish the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, and we were one of the best national institutions of human rights, not only in the region, but around the world, from Latin America, from Europe, from Asia Pacific. All of them know that we were one of the best, and we were sending our staff to train the Human Rights Commission of Philippines or Thailand or even in Australia. And Nepal and so on. So I don't regret that. But of course, it's not easy. It's not easy. When I watch that they removed the board of the Ministry of Women's Affairs, and the way I established that, I spent 6 months of my time when I was minister, sleepless night, and I was cleaning myself with the staff, the windows and the wall of that ministry, to give a space for women to raise their voice, to be present within the society. And they remove it in one day and put the Vice and Virtue, Ministry of Vice and Virtue. And the actual job, the main job of the Vice and Virtue is to restrict women's rights.
Yeah.
So symbolically for them, it's very, very interesting. And then I watched the abolishment of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Before that, I spent a lot of my time promoting education for girls and women and access to reproductive rights. They slowly, I see students around, and I think Makhfi also saw some of the students who studied in my school, the schools that I started. But to close down the school for a normal person in this century, a family or a mother, can they imagine that their children, and particularly the girls, are not allowed to go to school?
Yeah.
Just to born in a country called Afghanistan and have a government called Taliban?
Yeah.
Let's go back to the human rights for just a moment, because in your book, you describe introducing the concept of human rights to people who had never been taught that they even possessed them. Can you talk about what you learned from those conversations that you had across the country when you were introducing human rights to people?
Yes. I mean, some people who were politicians, so-called politicians, and they didn't like the word human rights because they lose some of their power when the people knows their rights.
Right.
They lose the control on people. So they were saying it's a Western concept. And I was saying, when we talking with the different group of people, that would you like to have access to a shelter? Do you like to have a roof on your head? Yes. Would you like to have food for yourself and for your children? Yes. Would you like to have access to clean water? Yes. And then this is human rights. So where it's Western?
Mm-hmm.
By saying it's Western value, it means that we are not human. So that was my discussion in my the topic that I was discussing with different group of the people. I remember that at the beginning we invited a group of people who were drafting the curriculum for the schools, and they were quite conservative, unfortunately. And this, before we start the workshop, they said, well, it's a Western value, we don't want this. And I said, just calm down. We will talk and we accept your accusation and ask the question. I can answer the question. So we had 3-day workshop. At the end of the day, they said, oh, we misunderstood because we had the brutal regime of the pro-USSR. We had the Mujahideen government, which was a disaster. We had the Taliban regime. And then after that, we were introducing human rights values and principles to the people. And then at the end of the day, they were accepting, yes. So why are you saying this? And then they were saying, no, we were misunderstood, and they were accepting. I think I claim to say that we had a lot of influence on people. I mean, I remember that one of the commanders of Mujahideen commander became minister and so on in the regime. One day, he was very much opposing me at the beginning. And then he said, well, I really respect you.
Wow.
Because you stand on your values and principles.
That you do.
Yes. And then he said, but you could not really enforce all of your values on the warlords. And I said, one of them is you. Would you thinking before that sitting with me and discussing these issues? And in fact, he invited me for lunch. And then he said, please go ahead. And then I said, were you thinking that one day Sima Samar will be walking ahead of you and you follow me? This is my force, imposition on you.
Yeah.
And then he accepted. He said, okay. All of his people were laughing. I mean, he was not very happy. I said, you know that I have ready answers, so you should not really discuss this with me.
Makhfi, I'm going to turn this question for you.
Yeah.
What happens when someone realizes for the first time that what they have accepted as normal is actually a violation of their dignity?
Oh my goodness, what happens once they find out that it's a violation of their dignity? I hope they would, rise up against what has happened to them. And sadly, that hasn't happened in Afghanistan because the oppression is so strong that people can't leave their homes without risking their lives for it. And people know what's happening to them. Like Dr. Samar shared, that parents, mothers, fathers, grandparents, they're all very upset and overwhelmed by the fact that their daughters cannot go to school, that they're not going to have the education that their mothers who are in their 30s did during the 20 years. But unfortunately, the way the Taliban has been operating for the past 5 years now is that you can't go to the streets, without risking your life. And you can be simply put in jail, tortured, disappeared, killed, and that's the cost you would be paying for that. And for women, it's even worse. I mean, the status of women in Afghanistan historically is that, you're the dignity of the family and you're the honor of the family. And if anything happens to you, that's you're destroying the entire family.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to add a little bit to what Dr. Samar said about why people, what's happening in Afghanistan and how people are not able to sympathize with that in a way. If I recall correctly, was that your question, Robin? And I feel like even now, people think it's their culture and religion. And we have tried very hard to tell people it's neither the culture nor the religion.
Right.
And it's completely against the will of the people. I mean, Dr. Samar gave her example that in the 60s, she was going to a Kuwait school.
Yeah.
And she is from that generation, and going forward, every mother, every parents want their daughters to be equally educated in a majority of the families. I mean, there were so many surveys done even after the Taliban returned to power, that 90% and 95% of the population want girls, women, to have equal access to education. And so what is happening is really not the culture, not the religion, but the Taliban and people like them have been pretty successful in using those. And unfortunately, for some people outside the country, falling for that. I mean, they've used it as a justification.
Right.
And I would just hope that people would not accept that as a justification for not allowing women and girls and for the treatment of women and girls the way it's been for the past 5 years now.
Yeah. Help us understand the distinction and the misunderstanding about the distinction, because to your point, they're using religion and culture to justify their policies. What does the world misunderstand about the distinction of what the Taliban is justifying versus reality?
A majority of the Afghan people are Muslim. I mean, they follow Islam, and within Islam, different sects. But if we look at just the main branch of Islam, Muslims take pride in saying that education is an obligation, is a duty. It's not, it goes beyond a necessity. So it's really not, and there are many verses mentioned in the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad that requires, women and men both to be equally educated, to have the equal opportunity of being educated. And it's not the culture because the people want it. People have been wanting to educate their kids. And this is not a new thing, and this didn't happen under the 20 years of the foreign involvement in Afghanistan. This has been, a culture of the people that they know the value of education. I mean, Dr. Samar went to school, a Kuwait school, in the 60s, Dr. Samar?
Yes, 60s.
60s. I mean, that's how long ago? She's still very young,
Yes.
but that was...
Thank you.
But that's, and that was in the south of the country where the current Taliban leadership is sitting. And can you imagine a girl being allowed to go to school after the age of 10?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I mean, she's probably sitting in hiding or online, but that's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty limited access. So I just hope people would understand that what the Taliban orders are really not based on the culture of the people of Afghanistan or the religion, and whatever religion that might be. I mean, I said a majority of the people are following Islam, but like Dr. Samar said, there are so many minorities, religious minorities, not just ethnic. And I haven't seen a single one of the person following a different sect or a different religion saying my religion says a girl should not be educated. Every single one wants their kid to be educated.
Yeah. Dr. Samar, since they returned to power 5 years ago, the Taliban have issued more than 150 edicts targeting women and girls. For our listeners who maybe haven't followed this closely, can you help us understand what that actually means in practice?
Yes. Before answering your question, I just want to add what Makhfi said.
Please.
prolonged war in the country, which is almost 50 years. I mean, it's 48 years of war and conflict, and one group goes and come, and each one of them violate the human rights of the people without any accountability and justice. So the conflict itself and poverty itself cause a lot of mistrust among the people and destroy the actual culture. In conflict, and if there's no security in a country, it's always women. It can be Afghanistan, it can be Sudan, it can be any other country, because women, unfortunately, we don't like to use the word vulnerable, but the reality is that our physiology make us more vulnerable to sexual abuse. So I think that is actually caused the people to be more male-dominated and more patriarch because of those destruction in the country. Actually, the culture is not something that it comes overnight. When
Right.
it continues, like the one we have 5 years now, it turned to be the culture of the people, kind of
Yeah.
acceptance and normalization of the issue. This is one point. The other point I wanted to mention, we should remember that the culture is unwritten code made by men everywhere, not only in Afghanistan, everywhere. So I don't like to say that we have a very good culture. We had, I mean, like every other country, it is male-dominated culture.
Mm-hmm.
But we were going in the right direction if the war was not happening in Afghanistan.
Right.
If the new style of using the religion as a weapon of war and promote that kind of mentality, you don't see any other country, Muslim country in this planet to use the same thing as the Taliban does. But now I was in a conference and I saw some people from Mali and other countries, African countries, where Al-Shabaab is active, where Boko Haram is active. They're using the same issue and saying if Taliban can do it in their country, we can do also in Mali and Burkina Faso and some other countries as well. So the empowerment of patriarchy and male domination comes with conflict and poverty.
Yeah.
Everywhere. That's one thing. To answer your question, it's more than 150 edicts and statement order, oral order by the Taliban to restrict women's rights. The first one was to close down the Ministry of Women's Affairs, for example. The women should not really go to work. And the second one is the access to education. First, they said we can start the school at the beginning of next year, when it's really the school usually start in Afghanistan on 21st of March every year, because that's our new year. And they didn't say that they are closing it down. But then they didn't open the school in 2022. And then they slowly said the university should be, the women and men and the boys should be separated in the classroom. So they had to separate the girls in one class and the boys in another class. And then they said, because we didn't have enough teachers and professors, so they said, put the curtain between the class. So one side the girls should sit and the other side the boys should sit. And then they close it down. Then the other edict, they at least allow the women and girls to go to get the education for paramedic, to be midwives and female nurses, to learn x-rays, because we need female staff in order to handle the female population of the country, or treat the female population of the country. Then they close down that one. So imagine all these comes with a decree or a statement by the leader of the Taliban, or by the chief judges, or simply by a simple mullah in the mosque. And then they started to say that women should be covered fully, so they have to wear the hijab. At least when they said women cannot work outside of the house, women were able to go to their beauty parlors and do some work, cut women's hair, and earn from that. And they closed down that was another decree, that all the beauty parlors should be closed down because women should not do this. So imagine, one of their order was the tailors cannot make female clothes. So that should be, this is also order. This is official language. And then they came that women cannot go to, for example, to park, and they cannot walk without accompanied by a male, without male chaperone. And the local transportation, even if it's taxi or a bus, they cannot take any female passenger if they are not accompanied by a male member, or if they are not covered enough. I still think that the people particularly women in Afghanistan, are really brave. They still comes without covering fully their faces. And they still run some home schools or underground schools or some other activity. So all of these laws, and then the recent law, not very recent, but the Vice and Virtue law, which was passed by the Taliban in 1st of August 2024, that has said that women's voice should not be heard.
Yeah.
So they're literally being erased from society.
Yes. Woman face, a Muslim woman cannot show her face to a non-Muslim female even. Can you imagine this? I mean, a normal person will not accept this kind of idea. But I don't understand. And of course, they put a lot of pressure on the men as well, but it's mainly their focus to erase women from public life. So the right to protest, they start to arrest people in Herat, as I said at the beginning. Women in Herat who are fully covered, and they are not allowed to touch those women. 2 people or 3 people fooling this woman. They have the burqas, they have the other kind of hijab that the Taliban wants. And this is against what we call it culture. This is against our culture. This is against our religion. This is actually against the dignity of any human being.
Yeah. And you've also said that they paint the windows black so that no one can look in and see women, and women can't look out.
Yes, on their first government, they ordered everyone that the 2nd floor of every house should be painted. The window should be painted. So nobody could see a woman inside the house, and no woman should not see outside the house. This time, one of their decree is the window should be as high so nobody could see inside the house. So when they make a house, if not, then the curtain should be as thick as possible so nobody could see. They didn't say painted, but this is the new style of almost painted one. And that the first time maybe they didn't see the curtain in the windows. That's why they said it should be painted.
Makhfi, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Dr. Samar so nicely, described some of the very major orders of the Taliban. On day 1, when they entered Kabul, Robin, they said women should stay home. This was their first day, basically, in office.
Mm-hmm.
Women should stay home until further notice, because their foot soldiers are not familiar with seeing women on the streets and outside their homes, and that we will, until further notice. And that notice was never lifted. And it was, in fact, expanded to more and more, across the country. And the same thing with education, that we're thinking about, the curriculum and the structure of how girls can continue to go to school beyond elementary. And we're working on it, and it's 5 years, and that work is probably still going. I don't know where that work is not being finished. And I just, when you look at every decree, every order, I think this is the end of it, and there's nothing left for them to come up with. And they're so creative. They've gotten so creative. Next day, there is something new. And then the day after, there is something new. And so what they have done really is to erase women, to imprison them in their homes, and to have them not be educated, that they cannot object to anything, whatever happens to them. And And that's not a simple thing to say when a girl's humanity is completely taken away from them. That you're not deserving of an education or for you to make choices. If somebody finishes high school, I mean, in the US, high school education is mandatory.
Right.
And then it's up to them after the age of 18, 19, whenever they finish. They can choose to go to college or community college or continue their education or not, because that still gives them a lot of freedom and a lot of choices and allows them to grow and see what's good for them and what's not good for them. A 10-year-old child, human, is a baby. They can't make proper decisions at 10.
Yeah.
For them to choose that now it's time for me to get married because I don't have any other option.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the Associated Press, Associated Press did a story on Gaza child marriage, but the Taliban recently also they issued a new law where girls as young, as whatever age they reach their puberty, that they are ready to get married and their silence is consent. Now, how do you expect, and we know that some girls as young as 9 and 10, 11 can reach puberty. So how do you expect an 11, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old to make, to say, I am ready to get married?
Right.
And for them, silence doesn't mean ready. For them, it's a fear. They don't know.
For sure.
It's confusion. And for that to be a law, to be considered as, agreement, I think it's just, I don't have the right words for it.
I don't think there are words for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all have children in our lives. If that's your daughter or niece or whoever that might be, we see them as kids.
Sure.
And the Taliban see them as people ready to be married.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, under these circumstances where unemployment is at the peak, poverty is at the peak, families are forced to also, marry their 10, 12, 13-year-old daughters to much older men and to families that they don't know very much, that, in terms of what's going to happen to their child.
Right.
So it's the restrictions, the orders, the edicts in place that are completely against girls and women, but it's also the unemployment, the poverty that are forcing families in making very, very sad decisions for their very young daughters. So the cycle is sort of goes around and it's all affecting girls and women.
Yeah. Both of you have been strong advocates for recognizing what's happening in Afghanistan as gender apartheid. For listeners hearing that term for the first time, help them understand why women's rights violations isn't sufficient. Why does that language matter? Dr. Samar?
Yes, I think as far as we know, apartheid, the word is the systematic and institutionalized discrimination and isolation of a group of people based on their race or based on their whatever. So what the Taliban does right now is systematic and institutionalized by the government to erase and isolate one gender from the society.
Yeah.
So what else we can say? We were just discussing, and Makhfi just talked about the child marriage in the country. We all understand that when there is the closure of school or lack of access to education, higher education, let's say at least school age, cause a lot of child marriages.
Right.
And child marriage, you imagine that if a girl is 9-year-old or 12-year-old and she's married to a 35-year man, she becomes a slave to that person.
Yeah.
He wants her to eat what she should eat, and he wants her to wear what he likes her to wear, and he wants to do anything on her. She doesn't have a choice. She doesn't have the ability to resist. So it's enslavement of these girls, promotion of slavery. And the Taliban, with their recent law, they actually legalized the slavery. So I think we couldn't find any other definition for what the Taliban does for women. That's
Yeah.
why we call it gender apartheid. And I'm glad that you raised this. And I would like you and all the other people who listen to support the criminalization of gender apartheid and
100%.
include gender apartheid in the Convention of Crimes Against Humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that's a huge debate right now to get that introduced into that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just to add to what Dr. Samar said, Robin, when there is a crime and you don't call it what it is, you cannot seek accountability. And that's why it's so important that in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, that gender apartheid is included and codified. We're talking about women and girls in Afghanistan, but this is not going to be limited to just Afghanistan. The treatment of women and girls, globally is not, to the fair standards that we demand. And Dr. Samar also mentioned earlier that, she was recently at an event and groups in Mali are inspired by the Taliban behavior and conduct. And by codifying gender apartheid, that's exactly what's going to happen. Groups who are going to have similar conduct, that there can be accountability, the states cannot engage with them, and that the legal gap is filled as well. Because right now, war crimes, genocide, a variety of other crimes are included in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. But gender, as we've seen it in the 90s in Afghanistan, now in Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world, where the discrimination, it's not just simply a discrimination, but it's the complete erasure. Discrimination is everywhere. It's even in the US.
For sure.
We look at the SAVE Act, that is making it so difficult for women who have changed their names or, different things that are making it difficult for them to participate in elections. Or, for example, access to abortion. So those discriminations exist everywhere. In Afghanistan, it goes beyond that discrimination. It's the complete erasure. And also because the fact that the so-called government has adopted the policy is what makes it so worse.
Yeah. Dr. Samar, in your book, you talk about being outside of Afghanistan when the Taliban returned to power in August of 2021. And you were actually scheduled to go back home days later. But instead, you were confronted with the possibility that you may never be able to return. What did that realization feel like?
It was very, very difficult because we have a proverb in our language. We say that it's better to be inside the fire than outside of the fire, because inside of the fire, you know how to get out or try to do.
Yeah.
And outside of the fire, you don't know exactly what's going inside.
Right.
So it was not an easy issue, and it was really, really difficult. I came to see my family here and not to plan to stay here. And they took Kabul in 15 and 16, they were already in my house. So, and it was clearly that I was on their list, and I still have some of when they called me and threatened me, some of their voice in my phone.
Wow.
Before the collapse of the regime, when I was still
Yeah.
the chairperson. Although we were actually protecting them from torture in the jail and protecting them from death penalty. And me and my colleagues, we were against death penalty and we were against torture. We were monitoring and actually not really allowing any officer to torture them. If they were, we were able to punish them, at least to remove that officer from the job. That was a kind of a punishment to degrade their position. But it was so difficult. That was the most difficult time of my life. And I gone through all these difficult life in my age, being forced to live to be a refugee in Pakistan. But that time I decided to go to Pakistan. This time I was not deciding to be in the US. I was forced to stay. So that was very, very difficult. And I think when I speak with the girls in Afghanistan, they are saying, "Are you happy?" I'm saying, "No, I'm not happy. I resist all my life not to get asylum in any country. And I had the possibility. I was traveling in this country from 1989.
Yeah.
So in Europe also, I mean, I had the possibility to get asylum. But I thought maybe I'll be useful over there. This time, it's really, really difficult. I cannot describe it. It's
I can't
very
even
easy.
imagine.
Yeah, I think you cannot understand it unless you are in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Makhfi, beyond the politics and the policy, what do you believe Afghanistan lost in 2021 that is going to take generations to rebuild?
So much, Robin, so much. The hopes and dreams of 40 million people who woke up every day and thought of a better tomorrow. And painful is the word that I would use. Seeing what happened on August 15, 2021, and that is the pain I see in every Afghan when they describe that day.
Yeah.
And that is, we often talk about women and girls, which, is so important because they are half the population. And I say more than half the population in Afghanistan. And that half the population, 20 million people, lost their hopes and dreams, everything they had built, and a whole generation that lost 5 years so far of education and opportunities. And Afghanistan lost so much. I mean, it's going to take so much time and effort to go back, and we might have not lost buildings and infrastructure, but we have lost time, and we have lost the opportunity to continue on the growth that started 20 years ago.
Right.
And unfortunately, that is completely derailed. Young men, boys, young men, they're growing up and living at a time where they think what's happening in Afghanistan is normal, and that this is what, one of the ways is. And that's very, very wrong. We were, not a thriving democracy, very, very far from that, but a country that was on path, on the way to getting better every day. And that was very much credit to the people of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
That they wanted that progress, they wanted education, they wanted prosperity, they wanted a different economic system, an economy for their lives, for them, their families. And they wanted to be, better participants and citizens of the country. And for all those people to have lost that moment and to be continuing to be struggling with that thought, I think is such a huge cost that the people of Afghanistan have paid for the past 5 years.
Yeah. Dr. Samar, there has been such extensive documentation of these abuses against women and girls, but with very little accountability, and you had mentioned that earlier. Is the greatest failure the violations themselves or the world's willingness to tolerate them?
I think that the biggest failure is the toleration of violation of human rights or normalization of violation of human rights, which become a culture, and it fueled the culture of impunity. So no one is actually is fair from the violation of human rights, and they feel that they can do anything without any accountability.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, very sad. Just to add that imagine the dream of the girls who are lost and they are forced to get married. Who's going to give those time back to them? And who will be responsible for that? It's when I think personally that the five year that I am in much safer place and much better life and not at least in a position to be forced to marry to someone. If I have this much suffering and pain, what is the situation of those girls who were dreaming to be one day a pilot, to be one day a medical doctor, and then she has to now to carry a baby and be a slave in a family?
Makhfi, you want to add anything to that?
I think I echo everything Dr. Samar said. It's, I'm in touch. I teach, I have a class, Robin. I have 55 students and they're mostly above 18. And I ask them all the time, how their lives have changed and to give me updates. And it is hard to listen and it's hard to accept or, that this is the reality. I mean, an 18-year-old had the same dreams and plans for her life, just like she does in the US or
Sure.
anywhere in the world. And that 18-year-old is now 23, and she has no education, and I mean, if she was lucky to finish high school, and her life is completely different than what she thought. Or a 15-year-old was in ninth or eighth grade, and she's 20 now, and she didn't finish her high school education,
Yeah.
and she can't go to university or college, and her only option is to go get married, because that's a different life. I just hope that people would understand that what is happening to women and girls in Afghanistan is really not the culture, not the religion. And if they don't see women protesting every day, it's not because they've given up.
Right.
We know women who are pursuing online education is in a very small number. Secret schools are back like they were during the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hope that people would see the resilience and the drive of Afghan women and girls, that they have not surrendered, and that they're continuing the fight for their rights.
Dr.
And I know this is not a very happy topic, but I just, it's
a necessary one, though.
it's a very necessary one, and I appreciate you for giving this time. But there is a fatigue among the people who used to support Afghanistan, or kept up with what was happening, and getting rid of dictatorships is not easy, and especially when you don't have any support. And it's been very difficult for women when they don't have the right to protest, when they don't have the right to leave their homes, to go out and show and demonstrate that they're not okay with what's happening.
Yeah. I want to switch over to peace and justice for just a moment. Dr. Samar, your definition of peace is much broader than simply just putting down weapons. How do you define peace?
I define peace when people live with dignity, and particularly women live with dignity. As I said, that I don't like the word vulnerable, but the woman as another gender, to live with dignity, not only to lay down the gun or silence the gun. So what the people trying to say, and even these days, I mean, we were so angry because there's a TV channel that's supported by the US, and Tulu is one of the private in the country. They have radio and TV also. The owner was saying that Afghanistan is safe. It's similar to, they even can drive. So my answer to him is that if it's really that safe, why your family is not there? Why are you out? So I think I keep saying that a peaceful country where the people can raise their voice, can protest for their rights.
And Dr. Saib, for a TV station, for a media outlet to report without any fear. And Tulu, for example, hasn't been able to do that.
Yeah, freedom of expression. I mean, expression is freedom of expression. Is media is coming under freedom of expression. Imagine in Afghanistan, women cannot raise their voice. They cannot read the Quran loudly, which is kind of a culture or tradition within the Muslim countries, not only for Afghanistan. So I keep saying that graveyard is the most peaceful place because nobody get up and protest. We do not want the peace of graveyard in the country. We want the people to raise their voice and be able to live the way they want. And more importantly, peace is where women have the dignity and equal rights. Otherwise, it's not peace.
Yeah.
It's oppression, it's dictatorship, it's control. So the woman practically in Afghanistan doesn't have any rights. But by saying what we lost in Afghanistan, of course, everything. I also talk to girls in different programs, and I see that how enthusiastic they are. And that really gives me hope. And I do not remember any time when I speak at the end of the program, I will not cry. It's not only the cry from sadness, but crying from happiness that they are still standing and struggling. and they're walking for hours and hours to come and be in a place to have a signal for internet or for their telephone. That is our hope. But I think it's responsibility of every human being, not only of the Afghan people. It's a responsibility of humanity. If we want to preserve, to keep our humanity safe, we need to fight against violation of human rights anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
Robin, if I may add,
Please.
I think there is double standard on what peace is and how certain governments feel comfortable with what peace is in one place and what peace looks like in another place. Cuba, Russia, Iran, North Korea, it's not violent in a way that, there's not an act of war, but countries, they often criticize them for being a dictatorship or for being a theocracy. But when it comes to Afghanistan, it's, then people can easily fall for it's more peaceful now than it was 5 years ago. So the definition of peace has also gotten this double standard of what peace looks like, for example, to some people in the US, in Europe, elsewhere, in Afghanistan, versus what peace looks like in Iran, in North Korea, and other places.
Yeah.
There may not be suicide attacks or rockets falling everywhere or missiles thrown in different directions like they used to 5 years ago or before that, but the progress and the opportunities have been stalled in much worse ways now than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just hope people would see that how much, the absence of education is affecting the entire country.
Yeah.
How much the lack of freedom of movement, the freedom to say something, the freedom to protest, the freedom for the media to report and hold people to account, not people only, but the government. And they haven't been able to do that.
Yeah.
So people are not dying in massive numbers, though there are people suffering from poverty and famine in much higher numbers now than they were 5 years ago. So it's important for people to see what peace looks like across board, not going with the double standard of peace looks like this in this country and peace should look like this in another country, or freedom looks like this in one place, but it's okay if it looks differently in another place.
I want to switch over to the international community for a moment because you've both been talking about that a little bit. Dr. Samar, you've described what happened in Afghanistan as a collective failure. What do you mean by that?
I mean, because we had the NATO countries in Afghanistan, and for first time in our history, actually, after 2001, all the countries were in the same side for a while, including Russia, China, US, and European countries and Muslim countries. Everybody was in the same page, supporting the new Afghanistan, so-called. And then what's happened? Quickly, they went back. The US decided to go to Iraq, and the attention drawn to Iraq and not really, the job in Afghanistan was not complete or not finished, and they went to Iraq. And then actually both countries went wrong. And then when they decided to, because there was a lot of flaws, I mean, they didn't have a proper strategy, they didn't coordinate it, they didn't listen to a lot of Afghans. They only listened to their friends, the one who were saying you are doing well and you are very good. They did not listen to the people who were critical of their action, including us in the Human Rights Commission, because we were critical and they were not listening. I saw all the ambassadors who were not agree with me on some of the discussion, and then it's happened. So it is because everybody was involved in Afghanistan. And then we failed. We gave back the country to the same group that we removed in 2001. So it is a collective failure of all of us. And unfortunately, it's a collective failure of the countries who claim that they are promoting human rights and democracy. So now what is happening, as Makhfi also mentioned this, that they try to ignore Afghanistan. They try to deny that nothing is happening in Afghanistan. It's their culture, it's their religion. They're happy, and now there's no fight and nothing, which was the same in 90s. And then we saw the result.
Right.
It's similar to that time. So it is collective failure, and we are not here to acknowledge that it is a collective failure.
Yeah.
It's the blame game is going on, and Afghanistan was corruption and so on. But I would keep saying to the international community, but you tolerated the corruption. You facilitated the corruption.
Yeah.
Those corrupt people brought the money back, either Afghans or non-Afghans. It's not only Afghans. Back to your country. Who?
The contractors.
Which one of them kept accountable? None. Why we are using this blame game instead of really looking at the failure in Afghanistan and learn lessons? And I see it, unfortunately, these days, that we are not learning from the history.
Yeah.
We think that the history is gone. We don't need to look at it. But it is, we end up with repetition of the mistakes. We end up of destroying the laws, the international laws. And we do not respect that, destroying the life of the people. And I'm afraid that the extremist people, the extremist group, are forced by this failure of the policy and strategy to be more powerful. And we will see worse of it.
Makhfi, what is the hardest truth the world needs to confront about its role in Afghanistan?
Exactly what Dr. Samar said. I mean, I like her framing that it was a collective failure, and that all parties are responsible and accountable, should be held to account. And the hard truth the global community is just recognizing that and not going around the blame game, and because that's not going to get anywhere. So accountability and taking responsibility are important steps for recognizing their role in the failure of Afghanistan. It is so heartbreaking. 20 years of investment, human, financial, all of it. And to have to let it go the way it was, and to not pay attention in at least recovering some of it and standing with the women and girls of Afghanistan, that they heavily counted on them, is difficult to understand the logic behind it.
Yeah.
And I mean, we understand that there are different priorities, but Afghanistan is a priority as well. The human rights of the Afghan people, women and girls, must be a priority as well.
Yeah. Makhfi, throughout this whole conversation, we've talked about the women who came before you, like Dr. Samar, who paid a really high price for speaking out. What did you learn from women like Dr. Samar that made silence impossible for you?
She is the trailblazer. She led the way, and she's still leading the way, and is guiding a whole generation of Afghan women. And there's so many. We've been so lucky with the leadership of women in Afghanistan, that they have led so powerfully and honestly. And for them to have been in a public role, speaking for the values that the generation after her, myself included, my peers, believed in, was a huge inspiration and comfort, that there were people who really cared about a system in the country that we all wanted to live under. And like I said, we've been so lucky with women's leadership mostly than men. And I'm so grateful for her, for risking her life, for losing her freedom, and for leading the way in making it easier for the next generations to be able to stand up for their rights.
Dr. Samar, what do you want the world to understand about Afghan women that it still doesn't understand?
I think they see the Afghan woman as a victim, but they don't see us as a survivor and as a resilient group in such a long, prolonged war and conflict in the country, where actually women was not really the main agenda and the main... If you remember, in 2002, we were, for a while, women freedom was one of the goals, but then it was fallen from the agenda. When you look at the amount of money that they spend on different issues, and then how much money they spend on the empowerment of women, is really little, very small.
Yeah.
And there's lack of coordination on it because they see that women are passive and property of the men, as some of the men in Afghanistan claim. They as a man, everywhere they think that way. They like to be that way, of
Right.
course. Who likes the troublemakers who end their life? So I think it's the people doesn't understand that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember that thanks to Makhfi, she said too much than I worth, but that we were very few when in 1990s when we were fighting for the women's rights. And now we are thousands.
Yeah.
And it is because of education. So they don't understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I may add to the women part, Robin, in terms of leadership, and this is not an afterthought or a second thought, but going back to the role of education, mothers played a huge role. Fathers did too, but mothers who were not able to go to school themselves very much understood the value of education, because what had happened to them, they didn't want that to repeat and happen to their daughters. And so a lot of the drive and the leadership of mothers was so key in ensuring that their daughters were educated and had a positive role in their society.
Yeah. Many people agree with principles. Very few people are willing to pay for them. Dr. Samar, looking back across your life, what made you willing to pay that price?
Well, I think I saw and I felt the discrimination myself. And I wanted to prove that as a woman, I can do this work, and my commitment. At the beginning, I didn't have a lot of support from my family. Even my family didn't want me to do all these things because, well, always my father was saying that he wanted to protect me. He wanted to keep me safe. But I decided to do what I wanted to do. So what I try to say here is my personal commitment. And I see the result because people like Makhfi in her age. I was just in Canada, and there's a girl who was working in the foreign ministry, in the global affairs. And she came up and she said, I studied in your school in Pakistan. And then I thought that it's interesting because the school that I started in 1990s in Pakistan for the Afghan refugees, 6 of my own nieces are medical doctor now.
Wow.
In the US and the France and the other countries, let alone the one who was in Sweden. The other day, one of them called from Sweden, and she's medical doctor in Sweden, and she gone to that school. It was so poor and it was so simple, but they give the tool to these girls to be one of the useful citizen of this planet.
Makhfi, when the history of Afghanistan is written 100 years from now, what do you hope it says about the women who refuse to surrender?
I hope they will be portrayed as heroes and survivors in that story, and I hope it's sooner, and I hope this doesn't continue for too long. I mean, women in Afghanistan, or the women of Afghanistan who have lived outside the country for the past 5 years, they've really been the one demanding accountability, demanding that foreign governments, international organizations stand with them and with Afghanistan, and not the party that's ruling it now. And I hope that their leadership will be commended and celebrated, and that they will not be seen as some people who surrendered. I take immense pride in how the women of Afghanistan have been unstoppable over the past 5 years. And I really think that they have been the voices that are seeking accountability and demanding that governments do not engage with the current de facto government, and are bringing to their attention the violations of human rights and the the situation of the country in general to their attention. And that's not a simple thing. I mean, Dr. Samar mentioned earlier that the head of Mobi Group, Tolo TV, he was supposedly one of the champions of human rights and democracy.
And freedom of expression.
Years. And now, just as of last week, I don't know where he was, in the UAE or somewhere in Europe, on stage, minimizing the suffering and the restrictions of women and girls in Afghanistan. I mean, that is the sort of leadership that has been on display from some Afghan men over the past 5 years, because it's in their interest to please. It's in their interest to survive, and that's their survival method.
Yeah.
For Afghan women, it's been completely the opposite. And I hope that story is written in the way that Afghan women have shown their leadership over the past 5 years. And during the 20 years, and for just who they are. They're survivors. They're heroes, and they are resilient.
Yeah.
We're all humans. It takes, this can't continue forever. Resilience cannot continue forever.
Yeah. Dr. Samar, how about you? When the history of Afghanistan is written, what do you hope it says about the women who didn't give up?
I think they have to acknowledge, because denial is not going to work. We denied for years and years. And when we deny, we don't really find a solution. We need to acknowledge that the woman in Afghanistan had a role, and not only that being servant of the male member of the family or the society, but they had their own stand and their own power and their own way of thinking and their own dignity. And that is really an important issue.
That they have their own voice.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, that is a beautiful place to stop. Dr. Samar Makhfi, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show. This is such a crucial conversation, especially right now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate you specifically also because, the 5 years is just around the corner.
Yeah.
And it's so important that people understand that it's not just 5 years, but it's 5 years of opportunities and hopes and dreams lost. And that I hope they would continue to stand and not be exhausted of what's happening.
Yeah. We will have links to Dr. Samar's book, Makhfi's phenomenal articles, and many other links in the show notes. And we will see you back here next week. Take care, everybody. If this conversation awakened something in you, pay attention to that. Audacity isn't reserved for a select few. It's a decision made in moments when conviction demands action. If this episode moved you, I invite you to follow the show and be part of amplifying women who are changing the world across cultures, continents, and systems of power. This is the Audacity Tapes. Until next time, choose courage.